Hi, my name is Greg Peterson. I am president of the Robert H. Jackson Center. We're on the verge of an extraordinary week here at Jamestown, whereby we will be honoring the legacy of Robert H. Jackson. Robert H. Jackson, former Supreme Court Justice, Solicitor General, Attorney General, but most known for his time as chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. We look forward to a week which will include the arrival of 4 of the former Nuremberg prosecutors here to relate their stories concerning Robert H. Jackson, his impact on the Nuremberg trials, and also what the legacy is today. This will be moderated by Professor John Q. Barrett, professor of law at St. John's Law School, who will lead us through the process during the week. We look forward to an exciting opportunity to not only have history revisited, but also to see how this lesson has formed a legacy to which we are all currently abiding.
I think there's no substitute for the genuine article in, historical work or law, and so getting a chance to be with them and present a conversation about an event that was in their relative youth 55 years ago, but is as timely today, perhaps more timely today than ever, is going to be extremely special. I expect that they will convey, I've spoken previously with all of them, and I've spent time with Bernie Meltzer and with Whitney Harris. They communicate an incredibly vivid experience because it's not something from the books. It's something that they lived and something that they did and something that mattered immensely and so kind of burned into their memories as they were doing it. And what they communicate is facets of Robert Jackson, who is and the work that they did for and with Jackson at Nuremberg. Bringing law to a chaotic post-war situation where it was not so clear that an orderly, fair resolution was going to be attempted, much less achieved. And they were part of doing that. So hearing them talk about it is really going to be. I don't think you can be a lawyer or, before that, a law student without running into the words of Justice Robert Jackson and finding something there that's very powerful. He was, by all accounts, the best or one of the top few writers in the history of the Supreme Court, and his opinions convey that in a very powerful and direct, informal writing style. So it was first his words as a Supreme Court justice, and then as I began to work first as a prosecutor and then as a legal academic, I found that the paths I was interested in kept crossing the paths of this man's life, and it didn't take me long to figure out that he really was, from my view, a central figure of his time, of his century, and that his time is his project, his contribution is much bigger than the 13 years he served on the U.S. Supreme Court. It really is a story of, I think somewhat the history of this country. A farm boy, a public servant, part of the inner circle during the New Deal, the creation of modern government as we know it, part of the creation of modern constitutional law as we know it, and part of the creation of the international legal order as we know it through his work at Nuremberg. So all of that grabbed me very powerfully. Well, Nuremberg, it's hard for us who were born after the fact to really understand this. That's one of the things that our 3 celebrity guests will make very powerful and apparent as they are speaking in the area and in the Roundtable on Wednesday. Spring 1945, Allied victory in Europe, is an incredible, dislocated, somewhat rudderless time. Here in the country, Roosevelt's dead, Truman's just 1 month in office as his successor, and somewhat unprepared because he wasn't in the loop. The loop kind of was confined to FDR's head of what was going on with the war efforts. And there's not really a continental Europe. I mean, the Nazis are vanquished, which leaves an enormous vacuum and an enormous cast of perpetrators and, millions of people in refugee dislocation. And all of that is part of what the Allies are wrestling with. One question is what to do with the losers, what to do with the perpetrators, what to do with the culpable. And one perspective on that question is to line them up and shoot them, and perhaps line up a lot of them and shoot them. And that was something that Churchill, for one, was inclined to advocate. Stalin, for another. Senior officials in the American government all thought that part of the victory was finishing the people who had been defeated.
Sure.
What Jackson and a couple of other people stood for, articulated, and then implemented was an alternative. They attempted to draw some lines and create some precedents and provide some examples for, I think, a better way. And that's really the start of the modern international legal order, which has agreed international norms of behavior, which established a precedent that aggressive war is the central criminal act. I mean, sort of all other crimes flow from one nation,
of course.
Somebody initiating war and war crimes and conspiring to do all of those things.
Sure.
And that's what they prosecuted at Nuremberg, and they prosecuted it in a way that pulled together four very disparate legal systems, American, British, French, Russian, into a system that's now become familiar through the work at Nuremberg and through the successor tribunals, that allowed people to have real defense counsel, to get access to evidence, an opportunity to defend themselves, real due process. So it's part of the constitutional heritage that we had here that, in a sense, we've shared with the world through the development of these international legal norms. That's part of what Nuremberg is. I'm writing a book about Jackson at Nuremberg.
Oh, okay.
So that is
together. Okay.
Right. That is the focus of one of my projects, and there's a vast Nuremberg literature, including magnificent writings by Harris, Meltzer, and King. What I'm doing is a bit more biographical and less trial focused. The Nuremberg literature, for example, Whitney Harris's book that you have here, is a majestic compilation and description of the evidence, the proof of what
the crime was.
What the prosecution demonstrated
It's sort
about.
of a brief for the prosecution.
Well, it's not an advocate's book. I think, to his great credit, he some years intervened by the time he wrote this. He sort of was able to step back, and the case had been won or lost. 12 were convicted, 3 were acquitted. Subsequent trials had largely been completed, and what Whitney's doing here is making accessible to an English reading audience the evidence, which is really not contested material. The judgments that you apply to it, that may be a place where an advocate would argue, proven or not proven, or proportional or disproportional. But this is what the Third Reich did.
And what you're writing about?
I'm writing about who Robert Jackson was, what he thought, what his decision-making process was during the year where he was the architect of this international trial and then the chief American prosecutor. And although it's within the framework of 1945-46, Jackson at Nuremberg, you really can't write about 1 year out of somebody's life without studying their whole life.
Sure.
So I'm writing biographically about Jackson at Nuremberg, but I'm writing more generally about Jackson. The International Criminal Court that the world is on the brink of creating. Actually, the United States has been, not part of it and largely an opponent, but there's a treaty that's in the process of being ratified around the world. More than 40 nations have now ratified it. When the number gets up to 60, it will take effect, and it will create a permanent international criminal court, which is the successor of Nuremberg, which was a World War II specific tribunal, and the current Yugoslavia tribunal, which is obviously limited to that geographic area and that time period, and the current Rwanda tribunal. Each of those ad hoc tribunals is a step on the road to a permanent international criminal court, and that's what's about to take effect. It'll probably be 2004, 2005 when it's actually created. And in that 1943, 44, early 1945 period, there was a commission that gathered evidence of war crimes, and that gets delivered to the prosecution effort at Nuremberg. That's part of the proof and part of the pre-existing structure. It wasn't great, and by no means was it a turnkey operation where Jackson and company just kind of like stepped in.
No,
but
it
had done some preliminary work.
Okay. I'm just thinking.
Now, if you know to ask that question, you have been doing your homework.